welcome to Grit and Ground. We bring you different types of movement through guest experts from the local scene as they share their insights, their passion, and how they find their balance. Hey, and namaste. We are so excited to be sharing the next few minutes, hopefully just a few minutes, in a conversation with our guest, who you can already see up on your screen. So she regularly submits articles on psychology and well-being at medium.com. She is the chief warrior of the light at Treehouse Yoga and the co-founder and psychological counselor at Lighthouse Wellness Philippines. Welcome, Rach Bonifacio.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Hello. Thanks so much for being here and taking the time out of your very busy schedule to go online and chat with us. So you, me, Karina, and Ned, who's our creative director, who you can't see right now. Karina, you can see. So we're all from the wellness and fitness industry. And we thought that your background as a psychologist, as a psychological counselor, would shed some light on our topic, which is holding space. And of course, as yoga teachers, all four of us here are. So it's necessary to be able to hold space effectively for our students. But we're curious to know if is there a psychological definition for holding space?
Yeah, well, I'm glad to be here tonight. It's my first guesting with you guys. Congratulations, you have so many episodes now. Okay, so we're talking about holding space today, and all four of us are yoga teachers, just like what you said. I guess before I start, right, I'm going to hold space for you guys, right, and ask you how you understand holding space as yoga
teachers. I've been talking, stars, but next week. So yeah, feel free to go ahead if you want.
Which one? Me? You?
You.
Me. Okay. I guess holding space, shut na on the spot. Joke lang. I guess it's creating a safe space for someone and understanding where they're coming from and meeting them where they are at. So also not imposing our beliefs necessarily or imposing certain ways of thinking on the person. But generally just creating a safe space for the student or whoever you are conducting a class for.
Yeah, great answer. Okay. Joy, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I agree with that. Just maybe also add that, yes, as teachers, as instructors, teachers, it's so easy for us, because we think that, yeah, we know a lot, or, we've been trained and certified. So when people ask us and they seem unsure, we tend to, it could be that the default is, as a teacher, is to do this or don't do that. And versus holding space would be, well, what would you do? How does that feel if you would do that? So more of the, I guess, asking a question instead of making statements, but asking and investigating.
Yeah, great. Okay, so both of your answers are actually correct.
Yeah.
Yay! Yeah, so basically, so basically as yoga teachers, we do hold space for our students, and the way we hold space for them is by creating that ambiance of safety, just like what Karina said, right? When we are in a yoga studio, for example, we make sure that there are blocks there, all of the other props that they need, but not only that the feeling of not being in competition with one another, and I have to say that not all teachers actually know how to do that, right? Sometimes we feel that, like as a student, sometimes I have attended classes where teachers actually compete with their students, right? And that's already not holding space. So basically holding space is letting others be, right? So technically, it's not about you anymore, but about the other person. And yes, in psychology, there's this psychologist. His name is Carl Rogers. So he was the one who came up with the person-centered therapy, right? The person-centered approach to therapy. So meaning it's not about what the psychologist knows, but it's about what the client knows, right? About his life, right? So yes, that's the foundation of a therapeutic alliance, a therapeutic relationship. Is really about holding space. So yeah, letting the person be who he is, allowing the person to feel the things that he feels, and also validating that whatever this person is experiencing is something that's, you know, that's valid and real to him. So basically, that's what holding space is. There's this. Uh, he's the founder of one of the coaching methodologies. His name is Dr. John Kim. There you go. I think he's on Instagram as the Angry Therapist, so I know him more as the Angry Therapist, right? And he has an article on Medium and Psychology Today, and he talked about holding space, right? Holding space is just letting the person be, period. And we don't really have any other job in holding space apart from creating a safe environment and listening to that person. But
Actually,
it's not as straightforward as we think it is. Like we're not really like we don't it doesn't come naturally, I think.
yeah. I actually like what you said about even the teachers have to assess them with themselves because I think sometimes just a comment like in classes when we teach we tend to have that ego also probably like
Yeah.
when you said competing with the students like you have to prove something it's nice that you said that you have to more or less be there to guide your students but not really to show off like you can do this pose or that. So yeah, pretty nice statement there.
Yeah. 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 And it's a delicate balance, like as yoga teachers, right? And as movement instructors, it's a delicate balance between letting the students be, right? And also learning how to assist them so that they can take their yoga asana further or yoga practice further, right? And so that's where mindfulness kicks in as a teacher. Like, do you want her to get into a pose because it actually makes you feel better, and but you're actually putting the student at risk?
So for, just in case our viewers are wondering, so what has this got to do with grit and ground? Where we always say like move always in all ways. Right. And I think, right now, so we just want to be, we just want to put this out there that, right, we're in quarantine, it's lockdown, it's a pandemic, and people have been at home, and really one of the major issues is mental health, right? Even the World Health Organization is already forewarning governments and leaders that, prepare for a mental health pandemic just
Yep.
because of the adjustment that people have to make, right? So, and it's, I guess this is our way, by inviting you to just again shed some light on holding space, because like what you mentioned, Rach, you holding space steps out, or is beyond the walls of the studio or the classroom, goes beyond the yoga teacher and the student in the class, right? Can this happen in relationships,
Yeah, for sure.
friendships,
Actually,
right?
yeah, it happens every day. Um, as long as you are talking with someone, right? You're in a conversation with someone, holding space is actually happening. But but yeah, it's either you're holding space or you're not. That's the thing, right? So sometimes I would say that it's not natural for us to hold space, especially for Filipinos. And this is where the sociocultural aspect of holding space comes in, um, because we are fun-loving people, right? Our culture is, well, at two edges of the sword, but our culture is based on resilience and humor. Humor is actually one of our coping mechanisms, as probably we've seen in memes and how people comment about what's happening in the globally, or even here in the Philippines, and to our government. It's all like katatawanan, yeah, like it's all comedy for us, right? So yeah, so sometimes because of that particular culture, yes, we're able to cope, but also at the same time, we kind of like brush our emotions under the rug, right? Because, we just make fun of it, laugh
Yeah.
about it, but we don't really like hold space for our emotions or other people's emotions.
Mhm.
I'm going to I'm going to be a little brave here and probably, and just maybe ask or say something that is a little bit of a sensitive issue, right? But
Mm-hmm.
in my experience with, with people that I talk to or in chat groups, right, or conversations really that I'm exposed to, right? When people undergo difficulties, whether it's themselves or they're experiencing, they notice other people, maybe their friends or family are having difficulties, either personal, financial issues, medical, whatever issues, right? And then, when they share it with another person, other people would tend to say, and I guess, I will pray for you, right?
Mm.
I'll pray for you, and with with Jesus, nothing else will harm you, right? And kind of like it stops there. Now, let's be clear to all our viewers. I am Catholic. I have nothing against Jesus. He's a great person. I believe, and there's nothing wrong with it. But but hear me out, right? To me, to me, being, I guess it comes from being exposed to not just the Catholic faith, but maybe other teachings other than, like, Buddhism and everything else. I'm not a Buddhist also. Well, but it's like when people do say that, and like to me, if I say, oh, something happened to me, and if I say, oh, I'll pray for you, you know what? If you just say that, in the name of Jesus, you'll be healed, right? And I don't. If I don't get healed, okay, do I feel really bad about myself, or is Jesus the bad guy now, or or what if I'm not Catholic and you said that to me? So
Yeah,
am I not
yeah,
going to be healed?
yeah. I get where you're coming from. Um, yeah, but whatever it is that you're experiencing, that's actually valid. And yes, those are actually like, parang it can actually happen. Like you can actually offend someone by saying those things, right? Like
Yes.
whether because this person is not Catholic, or maybe because at the end of the day, she didn't get healed. So yeah, so what now, right? So
Right.
well, number one, Filipinos are fatalistic in nature. We, based on studies, our culture is really like, we're a people who look up to a higher being, and that's what makes us unique too, right? Like here in Asia, and so we look up to a higher being. We're actually full of hope. So one of our other, if humor is one of our coping mechanisms, the other one is hope. Hope and prayer. Faith is the other coping mechanism, right? Faith is the other coping mechanism. And um, it helps. It is a valid coping mechanism, although I think that's a separate conversation, as what you were saying earlier. When you experience something, usually naman yan, negative, right? You experience something negative, and then people will just say, okay, I'll pray for you. And in there's this one that I especially love. Love meaning like because it's so common nowadays. Like, may the blood of Christ heal you, or something like that, right? And those are okay. It's just that that is actually not holding space. That's an example of not holding space for someone,
Mhm.
right? Because Filipinos, we are not comfortable dealing with negative emotions. We don't like
That's true.
confrontation, right? So we don't like dealing with negative emotions. We don't know what to do when someone is experiencing a negative situation or experience, right? So what do we usually do? I'll pray for you. Okay lang yan. You'll be fine. Wala yan, right? Um,
Tawanan
and
mo
of
lang.
course, tawanan mo lang. And then the other one, my favorite is, um, buti nga, ikaw, ganyan eh. Eh, yung ako,
Yeah.
the comparison, right? So those are examples of actually not holding space for other people. Because, okay, so when we hold space, we allow the other person to experience whatever it is that's rising for him or her. So, yeah. So this phrase that I got from Mark Brackett, he's the director and founder of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. He has a book that's entitled Permission to Feel, right? So in that book, it's self-explanatory, right? We actually, because like we say, oh, how are you? Kumusta ka? And then we just expect people to say, oh, mabuti naman, okay lang, right? And even Americans, Westerners are also saying the same thing. Like, how are you? I'm good. That's it, right? But that's not really how one feels, right? So what he's saying is you have to allow yourself permission to feel, and you also have to allow others to feel whatever it is that's rising for them. So yeah, we don't know how to do that as a people. We don't like confrontations. We don't like negative emotions, and so we just brush them off. Okay lang yan. Buti nga.
So what would you say would be the proper response, or a response that would be considered as holding space for someone, instead of just saying na, hindi, okay lang yan, kaya mo yan, like that? Because to some people, they feel like they're helping in that way, but yeah, they don't know then siguro that it could not be as helpful. So
yeah, it's actually easy, but it's easy to say, but if you are already in that situation, it's kind of like parang uncomfortable to say. All you have to say is, do you want to talk about it? Right? Gusto mo pag-usapan natin?
So just being there for someone, being there to listen if ever.
Yeah. And if you are the one holding space and you offered that, right? Like, gusto mo pag-usapan natin, you want to talk about it. Always remember that it's not about you. It's not about your past experiences or your advice, your expertise. Nothing about you. This is the other person's process. Let the other person go through it by just, like voicing it out.
Yeah.
So or ask.
Yeah.
Or ask. Gusto mo pag-usapan? And then crossing your fingers. Sana wag.
Sana wag.
Yeah.
Sorry, Car, you were gonna say something.
So since we are talking about also this pandemic, and I know that it's very challenging for a lot of people, and you mentioned a while ago that there are a lot of different ways to cope, but you also mentioned a while ago that it's a valid coping mechanism. So what would you say are invalid coping mechanisms? So just to differentiate what is valid versus invalid.
Well, there's actually like no invalid coping mechanism per se, but there are healthy and unhealthy coping mechanisms. So, like for example, praying and being hopeful, those are actually positive coping mechanisms. Those are actually healthy coping mechanisms. But imposing that on someone is not. And then other good coping mechanisms would be like I know a lot of fitness instructors are hosting Zoom classes or IG Live or FB Live. Those are actually forms of healthy coping mechanisms, like sharing your movement discipline and also joining classes, keeping fit. What else? Like eating healthy food despite having a hard time going to the stress and anxiety-inducing grocery stores
So the
nowadays.
bad version is binge eating ba?
And of course, yes, the opposite of it is unhealthy eating naman, right? So that's not a healthy form of coping. Um, yeah, so I mean, I think these are things that we already know, but if we are mindless about it and not careful about these things, then they just slip off our mind, right? Like, and yeah, and then just when you're stressed, to just grab the nearest bag of chips there, or bili ka na lang ng ice cream kasi mainit.
Yeah.
All of these things, right?
So I guess, a question just popped up is like coming from so you're a psychological counselor and you're a yoga teacher and owner of a yoga studio. And when someone comes up to you and says, Teacher Rach, so really, what's the best way to, be healthy and be well during the pandemic? Do I do more of exercise, whatever that may be, or do I do more of the mindfulness stuff? Like, what's your response to that?
Yeah, well, just like you, Joy, like I like the mindfulness bit of it, but I think that's encompassing, right? So it's holistic. Like, because I advocate din kasi like the holistic wellness. So which includes mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual, right? And I think all of it are needed during the pandemic. So the easiest one is, of course, physical wellness. I think it is the easiest one, but maybe not for everyone.
Yeah.
Physical wellness can be the most accessible. There you go. Maybe most accessible because all you have to really have is the willingness to do it. Because in terms of resources, even YouTube has so many free workout videos, right? Like yoga videos, HIIT circuit, etc. Um, so yeah, I think that's the most accessible. Of course, the more challenging part of physical wellness is our eating habits, right? Our eating habits. But of course, I also I also think that there's a balance to it. Like I still believe in a balanced diet, right? But also listening to what your body needs, right? I mean, if you're the kind of person who don't get affected by ice cream, then by all means you can eat ice cream, right? But because I eat ice cream, I'm being defensive.
I just look at ice cream. I gained 10 pounds.
Init, guys.
Yeah, ang init din kasi. Like, but yeah, but like, if you know which foods your body respond to the best, then go for that, right? I think mine is raw vegetables. So which means that I have to buy them more frequently because I can't store them naman, right? So there. And then next is spiritual. Spiritual is, of course, something that's unique to everyone, right? Like you can be praying at night, you can be meditating, or you can be journaling. That's also a spiritual practice. You can be painting, you can be dancing and feel that it's a spiritual practice. So it's all unique it's unique to everyone. So it depends on how you connect to maybe a higher being or maybe the wiser self, right? And then what else? Emotional well-being is quite tricky. It's tricky because yun nga we're gonna circle back to holding space because not everyone is able to hold space for you. Um, and 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 we know how sometimes inaccessible psychologists are because they're expensive, right? But what's good about this pandemic is a lot of mental health advocates are actually offering free counseling, free life coaching, free psychological interventions, even like an entire program, like 5 days, they offer it for free. So yeah, I think that's one. But if you have a friend who can hold space for you, like I can hold space for any of you whenever you want.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Oh,
It has the Lighthouse Wellness, diba? Right? Yeah. Can you share us more about Lighthouse Wellness? Like,
yeah. So yeah, in Lighthouse, what we actually have a pool of coaches, life coaches. We have nutritionists. We have psychological counselors. We also have licensed psychologists,
Nice.
and we have psychologists in training. So depending on what you need, it's sort of like Tinder, right? So yeah, depending on what you need and what you're looking for, then we kind of like match you with someone, right? And that's basically the first question we ask of you, of our clients, like what they expect to gain from a counseling session, right? Or the whole counseling thing. And that's when we match them to whoever. Could be a life coach, could be a psychologist in training even.
Mhm. I'm just curious, when did the Lighthouse Wellness start actually?
November 1st, 2019. So just last year.
Last year ka, fresh lang.
Yeah,
Just in
fresh lang.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, just in time. And then we also like, I think, well, I don't think we're the first one in the Philippines to offer remote counseling, but even before the pandemic, we were already doing remote counseling
Mm.
via Zoom.
How's it going now? Especially like a lot of people are experiencing anxiety, and yeah, people are actually taking a toll on their mental health. So how is it now, yung Lighthouse Wellness and receiving people with
We actually are swamped. I think we have 20 people pa on the wait list because we're finishing some programs for other people. Um, we are, yeah, we're all like full in terms of client load.
Mhm.
So yeah, so we're actually looking for more coaches, and and yeah, like a lot of people kasi are looking for someone to talk to, and depression and anxiety has spiked up. Also, interestingly, like because we hear a lot about anxiety and depression spiking up during the
Yeah.
pandemic, but we don't hear about the people with OCD or OCPD, obsessive compulsive personality disorder or obsessive compulsive disorder.
Mhm.
Yeah, so they're also having a hard time because they get paranoid because of having to go out, having to make sure that they're protected, and
Mhm.
all of these things. So
One
those are the things that are spiking up.
Okay, so I'm really curious about actually this topic, like you mentioned, also depression spiking up. So, when did you think did it all start in a way, yung pagka-spike niya? Like, even prior to this lockdown, kasi, di ba, parang we always talk about it. And also, like, for example, yung mga, paano ba, older generation than me, they would say na anong time namin parang di naman sobrang ganyan. Yung mga ganun. So, yeah, can you shed some light on maybe like a quick, I don't know, history or background on how it all became so prevalent now?
Yeah. Okay. So, well, let me just comment on that, like the comment of older people towards maybe you or someone that like in panahon namin, because that's also something. That's also a way or a form of invalidating your experience or everybody's experience now. Na parang ano panahon namin wala lang ganyan ganyan or whatever, right? So like, but yeah, that was your time, but this time is different, right? So it's also a form of invalidating. So at least like kind of like put an asterisk on that, right? Okay, so when did it spike? I think it spiked around Feb, at least for us. When the whole Wuhan thing came out, and but it wasn't the Filipinos or our clients here in the Philippines who were worried, because we have clients who are in the US, in Spain, Singapore, and Malaysia. So they were actually the ones who first reached out to us, and not Filipinos that have problems or issues with COVID. It was actually overseas.
Wow.
Uh, yeah, yeah. I,
Just,
I, I I guess that's just I think that's just right, because malayo sila sa family, so like they kind of started feeling alone and far from family and scared,
Yes.
fearful, right? Na baka ma-stuck sila doon or whatever, right?
Mhm.
On a related note, right, and in relation, I guess, to Car's question, in early February, I remember I was doing some research on the World Health Organization website, and these are
Mm.
some of the items that I picked out for mental health. So this was early February this year. So 800,000 suicides globally each year, and then less than 2% of the global median health budget goes to mental health. And then 9 is the median number of health workers per population of 100,000 people. Those are global numbers for mental health. It's like, wow. So I guess it's so important to be a good space holder for other
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. So I'm
Because
not sure if you have the stats for the Philippines. For the Philippines,
oh, this
we
was global.
actually
Yeah,
have,
what's the Philippines?
yeah, about 10% of, like, well, about 3% of our population has reported that they're feeling depressed or or have anxiety, right? But these are only the people who sought
Reported.
help. Mm-mm.
Correct.
Yeah. So the average, well, not the average, but the predicted percentage is actually 10%. And that's huge because we have 100 million people,
Yeah.
right? We have 100 million people. So are we saying that 10 million people are actually experiencing depression or anxiety but are not talking about it or cannot afford to talk about it? That's
Correct.
So, in your experience, also, what would be like the usual triggers or what contributes to depression? I
mm-hmm.
guess is that the right question? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
Ice
I'm sure
cream.
I'm sure that you guys are familiar with the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Yeah. So in a way that's correct. Like, like physiological needs na like wala akong bahay or wala akong trabaho, wala
Trabaho.
akong pera,
Yeah.
wala akong makain, right? Is really one of the major triggers. But there's also an argument that actually that's not our main need. Our Maslow's is actually kind of
Slip.
jumbled.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, jumbled. Okay, I'll give you an example. Sometimes you need to belong to a group in order for you to find shelter. So belongingness yung una ng Filipinos.
Mm.
So it really varies per culture then.
Yes, it does. So the Maslow's hierarchy of needs is actually very Western. But for us, third world country, and with all the bayanihan, culture that we have,
Right.
it's belongingness. Eh. Like if somebody cares for you and you belong to a group, a family, and when we talk about family, it's not just like small family, diba? Like Filipinos always have like extended family ties, right? Then you won't have to think about shelter anymore or food anymore. Kasi ibabahay ka naman nila eh, alagaan ka naman nila eh.
Mhm.
So
Right.
it's fun, no? Like when we look at it that way. So yeah, so one of the triggers of depression is the fear of being alone for Filipinos. Like being far from the people that they love, um, and 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 feeling isolated. That's why it's really hard for Filipinos to cope during this pandemic, and that's why we also say like ang titigas ng ulo, labas ng labas, right? Because there's a need to really connect,
Yeah.
to belong, to socialize, right? That's very important for Filipinos. So yeah, so that's one of the major triggers. Um, yeah, the other, it's no different from other cultures, right? Financial issues, perception of achievement or success,
Mhm.
relationship issues.
Okay.
Really
Similar.
just about relational. issues and
Yeah,
dealing with
yeah.
the intrapersonal aspect.
Mhm. Okay, but then even prior to like the COVID situation, the parang yung spike itself of depression is prominent, right? So, tama ba? Because when I read also about it, like in the medical field, before it was termed as just anxiety, but then it elevated into depression. Is that
Mm-hmm.
right? So, yeah,
Yeah.
can you shed some light na is it because I don't know, in Orgom kasi in my sa college before, parang of course once you name something then it becomes real or it becomes present. So yeah, from there siguro can we backtrack na how did it come about?
Sure. Yeah, anxiety is actually they're saying that based on studies that people who are depressed are usually anxious first,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're anxious first. They're worried about something, and the feeling of anxiety kasi is similar to the feeling of being overwhelmed. There's so many things in our heads, right? And if there are so many things in our heads, we try to manage these things, but we can't. That leads to self doubt. That leads to thinking that I'm not adequate enough to handle these things, um, or not even that, like, or nobody's helping me with these things, right? It can be external or internally induced. So, yun. So parang because of that, they now go to feelings of despair,
Mm-hmm.
and when people start feeling desperate, um, the thing is the tricky thing is sometimes, actually most of the time, they don't ask for help, right? And that's why as friends, right, we have to check on people who make or our friends, period, right? We don't even have to categorize them, we just have to check on our friends sometimes, right? Because we don't know what they're going through, and again, going back to holding space, just let them talk about these things, and sometimes naayos nila on their own just by talking about it. They kind of like organize it in their heads because they're now verbalizing it. But there are also times when they really can't, and they just cry, right? And as space holders, our job is to let them cry, right? Let them cry because it's a way for them to release that feeling of desperation. And then after they cry it out, next thing is maybe help them organize what needs to be done, right? Think of action plans na. So in Lighthouse, we actually have that framework going on for us. We call it the triple A. So first is awareness. Second is assessment. And then third is action. So awareness is, like, yeah, that's where mindfulness comes in. Naming it, just like what Karina said, naming it, labeling what you're experiencing is already half the battle won, right? Because you already know kung sino yung sniper na tumitira sa'yo. Like, you already know who the sniper is, where he's located. You already can name that sniper, right? The next thing is assess and see whether you want to stay in this situation, or do you want to keep experiencing the same thing, or do you want to shift? So it's either a stay or a shift, and most of the time it's a shift, right? Most of the time it's a shift, and then that's where you move on to action. Okay, so this is what we're going to do, right? So there, and um, for Lighthouse and most therapy sessions, the first thing is to get data. So what we do is gather data through journaling. So we ask our clients to journal what they're experiencing. We teach people even to name their emotions,
Um,
and it's so difficult for a lot of people. Like,
yeah.
Identifying
yeah,
and feeling din.
mm, yeah. For example, we are stuck with good, feel good, feel bad, I feel mad, I feel sad.
Really? At least
Yes.
walang okay, di ba? Okay lang.
Okay.
Yun yung ano.
Sakto lang.
Sucks lang.
Oh, may ganun ba? Sucks lang. Yeah, but yeah, we're stuck with those four. I feel good. Or okay, yan. Yun yun. Okay lang, ganyan. I feel good. I feel sad. I feel bad. I feel mad.
Mhm.
That's it.
Oh.
So, dapat
So,
i-expand.
yeah.
Yeah, like that's
But the struggle with it is kasi the Filipino language is also limited.
Mhm.
Um, for example, ano bang magandang example?
Feel ko deep
Parang,
yung iba eh. Deep
yeah, like for example, um,
frustration.
like let's stick with positive emotions, right? Like,
Okay.
Okay. Yes, practice.
yeah, masaya ka, 'di ba? Like masaya ka. Nanalo ka sa loto. So, anong feeling mo?
Galak. Ako ay... Joke lang ba? Galak?
Galak na galak, tutama.
Galak, masaya, galak, right? Galak. O sige, galak. Sige.
Naiipi ako sa tuwa.
So we have to like add pa all of these descriptors. Sige. Pero like word lang. Sige, we'll stick with galak. For example, so nanalo ka sa loto, you're galak. Nag-propose sa'yo yung boyfriend mo at ikakasal na kayo.
The name kami.
Ano
That's for you.
Tagalog
Natakot. Joke!
Negative emotion pala.
The joke lang. My gosh, to the boys. Don't be mad.
Shout out.
He's just kidding.
Sige, ano. Like if it's a...
boyfriend din.
Huh?
Joy na lang, may boyfriend din.
So what could be an emotion? Tagalog, right? Could it still be galak? It's masaya, galak, tutuwa, ganon. Pero kapag ginising ka ng pusa mo, di ba? Tutuwa ka din, masaya ka din. Right? So it's like, it's very limited. Our vocabulary is actually very limited. Feelings of ecstasy, for example, versus feelings of bliss. Or joy. Yes, joy. Right? Those are different emotions. There are subtle differences in those things. But in our language kasi, it's very primitive. Diba? If we stick to negative emotions, ganun din. Parang naiinis ka, gagalit ka, yun lang. Parang galit ka, o kaya nainis ka. Or other, equivalent. Banas.
Or hindi lang tayo masyadong magaling sa Pilipino at pag may nakikinig na lola o lolo dito ay
or yun.
Right? Big word para dyan.
Pwede rin. But it's not just the Filipino language. Like, it's also our limited vocabulary in the English language, right? So, di rin natin ma-distinguish yung frustration from anger. Those are two different things.
So, Rach, I have a question. Speaking of labeling, right, your emotions and about describing your emotions, you know how some people, when you ask them, or they'll just express what they're saying and they'll say, nade-depress ako, right? Yeah, nakaka-depress naman to, nakaka-depress or depressed ako eh. Pwede mag-absent, depressed ako eh. Right? And like to me, what I always say is that, okay, I mean, especially if you're the boss, is that clinically depressed? Because it has to be clinically depressed for you to be able to say you're depressed, or can you actually say yourself that I'm depressed? Your thoughts?
Yeah. Depression is actually an extreme feeling of sadness, and you don't have to be clinically depressed to use that word correctly. Like, for example, you lost someone, right? You're undergoing grief, and because that person is so close to you, you can actually experience depression, but it may be short-lived. It's not the clinical depression that by the book, the description of what clinically depressed people experience, right? But yeah, pwede mo naman sabihin that you are depressed. But I know what you mean, like when you are the boss, let's say, and somebody says, I need to take a leave because I'm depressed. Ganyan. I think it's important also for managers, like people managers, to hold space for their employees. Kasi who else will hold space for them in the workplace, right? Yeah. So okay lang naman. That can be valid.
Just
But
explore and investigate a little bit more, right?
yeah,
Again,
yeah,
hold space.
yeah. Delikado lang baka nade-depress din siya because of the boss. So that's a different conversation altogether, right?
Uh-oh.
Right. Yeah. So before we go, Car, I don't know if you have any more questions.
Yeah. Actually, I have.
Yeah. I see the thought bubbles in your.
Okay. So I noted it down because I'm a nerd. What are some notable observations you have seen in terms of how people think and behave due to this pandemic? Specifically, like, siguro naming the act of it. Like, one example I saw in one of your posts is gaslighting. So yeah, can you
Mm.
name, yeah, based on your observations lang?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so here that now that we're experiencing a global pandemic, right? People don't understand what they're going through, right? But what we are actually going through globally is grief because we lost our normal lives, right? We lost normalcy, and when we lose something, whatever it may be, it can be you lost a job, you lost a relationship. Now we lost our everyday routine. That's grief, right? Um, and well, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the stages of grief, but the first one is really denial. And I think even until now, a lot of people are still in denial that we are experiencing this. Um, the second one is anger. Then we have bargaining, and then depression, and then acceptance. And it's not linear when we experience grief, kasi, right? So we're not gonna go through all of these stages like in a linear way after ng denial, anger na, after ng anger, bargaining na. Hindi siya ganon eh. We actually bounce from one state to another. So I think by this time, um, well, I still know kasi people who are still in denial eh. Like, how does that work? Like, they're still saying na, it's just like the flu, you know? And these are the people who, sadly, they are the ones who remove their face masks when they go to the grocery store. They are the ones who still insist on, um, now kasi pwede na, but they were the ones who insisted on still jogging, for example, kahit na bawal. So these are the people who are experiencing denial. Of course, anger is something that we see almost every day, and I see it on social media, bashing the government, like, or, or, or not even just the government, but other people, right, on social media. So that's anger, right? Blaming people is part of anger. Not knowing what to do is part of anger. And then a lot now are in the bargaining stage. And how does that look like? This is when we tell ourselves na, yeah, I'm wearing my face mask. I'm gonna go outside. I'm gonna wear naman my face mask, and then I'm going to sanitize everything naman, right? And and because I'm doing this for myself and doing this for others. It's like convincing, right? Convincing yourself and convincing others na, yeah, you're doing your part. This is for the best. The Mother Earth is healing. This is bargaining, right? Mother Earth is healing. The animals are happy. Yeah, like we don't have pollution anymore, etc. So those are like bargaining, bargaining behavior, right? So looking at different perspectives and also convincing ourselves is part of bargaining. Of course, depression is given, right? Like especially for those who don't know now what to do, overwhelmed with work, or because they lost their jobs too, so they're experiencing multiple grief. Like that's really complex, right? Nawalan ka na ng everyday life mo, like your routine wala na. Nawalan ka pa ng work, nawalan ka pa ng money. You know, all of these things, it's piling up. So that's really complex. That's where depression kicks in. And then acceptance is, okay, this is our new normal. Pandemic is happening. There's no vaccine yet. It might take X number of months, maybe even a year or two before we can get the vaccine. And so this is how I'm going to adjust. Right. So yeah, so those are the things that the behaviors that we encounter as we go through this pandemic. And you know, like just like what I said, it's not going to be linear. So maybe today I woke up with the acceptance that okay, work from home, you know, like I yeah, I can't do anything about it. It's okay. I'll just do a Zoom call with you guys, ganyan. Pero tomorrow maybe I'm back to bargaining, or maybe I heard the government say something and I'm back to anger, you know, and it can be like that, and it can be confusing. It's important that we label it, yeah, that we label it as grief, that we label our stages so we know what we're going through.
Mm.
Kasi ang hirap eh, like if you don't know what you're going through every day, it's just like, oh, I'm anxious, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm depressed. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a fluctuating experience for everyone. No? Parang at some point we feel okay, and then mamaya parang iyak ka na lang bigla sa corner na hindi mo alam bakit. Ganun.
Yep.
Yeah. So I have a few more questions actually. I remembered also one time that you have, and I know you have this book, diba, si Rolf Nobeli, yung The Art of
Yeah.
Thinking Clearly. So yeah, I remember that because I shared it, and then you said you have it. So I'm just curious also, like, what are like the common biases that you have observed with the people that you interact with, or yeah, not necessarily like during this pandemic, but pwede rin naman. Yeah, so the biases that you commonly observe.
Yeah. I think number one, like here during the pandemic, number one is catastrophizing talaga. People are, well, because it's part of being anxious, right? Like having anxiety. It's thinking, na baka magkaroon ako ng COVID, right? And that's okay. Pero sometimes kasi our anxiety can actually manifest the symptoms of COVID, right? I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with mind-body connections. Like when you're anxious about, especially about an illness, you can actually manifest the symptoms of that illness. And that's when it gets really tricky. Nilalagnat na, inuubo na, right? And then thinking na, oh my God, mamamatay na ako, I have COVID, ganyan. Um, yeah, so that's common right now. It's good that we already have the rapid test kits, although I heard that it's not as accurate as we would like it to be, but at least it's there. It can detect antibodies. But yeah, like so that's one. The other one is also it comes in many names kasi, like the I mean I forgot the name eh, like comes in many names, but the reward fallacy. I'm sure you remember that, Karina. Um, heaven's reward. There you go. The heaven's reward fallacy. Like this is the thinking na, oh, there are only 500 cases in our subdivision, or no, not subdivision, in our area. In ano ba ang BF? I think BF Homes is around 70. So let's just use that because I'm familiar with it. Like, okay, so in BF Homes, there's 70 cases. What are the chances na ako yung makaka-contract ng COVID? So I'll just feel lucky and prance around without my face mask or whatever. Maybe not take extra precaution. Yeah. And then other ones are like, siguro, one of the most common and not COVID related is the halo effect. And this is my pet peeve. Yeah, it's my pet peeve. Why? Because like that's the halo effect is basically not looking at the negative aspects of something, right? But focusing on the positive ones. In our cases in Lighthouse, a lot of them have something to do with relationships, and not just romantic relationships, but interpersonal relationships in general. Relationships with a boss, with a parent, with a romantic partner, etc. Right? Or with a friend even. But when people, I guess kasi then like Filipinos are nice people. So we're kind of like forgiving, and we accept the flaws of other people, but also not seeing that we're already, maybe some people are already stepping on our boundaries, or maybe we're not setting boundaries at all. Yeah. And so yeah, the halo effect is one of my pet peeves, because like parang sometimes excuse the term, pero kasi millennial term ko, I'm sure Karina knows about it. Like some people are like in a relationship with mga fuckboys ganyan.
Oh yeah, I know that. I
Yeah.
know that.
Like sometimes I feel for them, because I know that feeling. I'm seeing also my 21-year-old self, like being in a toxic relationship is like, yeah, it has its merits, because you're eventually just gonna grow from it, right? But also, getting stuck there because you're applying the halo
Yeah.
mentality. Like you're just seeing all of the good romantic stuff, pero wow, really, dude, sinasampal ka na niya, or he's already verbally abusing you. Okay lang kasi sweet naman talaga siya eh. He means well. Okay.
Hirap.
Yeah, medyo mahirap siya. Kasi number one, if I'm the one holding space for these people, I can't be projecting, my 21-year-old self to them, right? So it's a crawl, um, like asking them why, their values, why they still want to be with this person, um, what are the good things, what are the bad things. So magpo-pros and cons pa. And then what do you think can make this better, etc. Like before we actually come to an action plan, because the awareness part of it is so difficult, right? Yun. And I think I didn't answer your gaslighting question earlier, Karina. What was that again, like about gaslighting?
Oh, hindi naman. Parang it's more of what are other um ano ba? Like cases or wait. Nawala. Like what are other scenarios na aside from gaslighting na-experience ng mga tao?
Okay. I think I answered that one.
Yeah, you answered it actually.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Just making sure I didn't miss on anything. So yeah. And that's what makes holding space really difficult, right? Because we all have our biases, we all have our experiences, and sometimes there's like my husband calls it a mirror drop, right? Like sometimes when you're talking with someone, there's a big mirror that drops in front of you. Na okay, you're feeling angry already as the person holding space, because not because of the person, but because maybe you're feeling angry anger towards your old self who experienced the same thing, and you see that you were helpless during that time, right? And it's something that we all of us, because we all hold space, that we should be careful about. Like even as yoga teachers, like someone who can't balance in tree pose, right? Like, and we can't be frustrated with that person, because it's her body, right? It's not our body. Kahit na 1 year na siyang uma-attend sa'yo, pero hindi pa rin siya makabalance sa three pose. We can't, the moment we feel frustration, know that it's only a projection of your frustration towards yourself.
That's super nice. Yeah, parang it's about you pala.
Yeah.
It's always about you. It's not always about you,
Yeah, but your frustrations are about you.
True.
Yeah.
Okay. Si Joy.
You just like stop there, like okay, I know you have tons and tons and tons of questions, Car. Lots there, some more. So, but before we drop off, because we don't want to hold, our dear guests any longer, um, one question that we normally ask our guests is,
Mhm.
how do you grit and how do you ground?
Ooh, oh, how do I grit and how do I ground? Pwede bang ground muna?
Of course, yeah, in any order. It's not
In
linear.
any order. It's not linear. We can bounce from like
Yeah.
grit and ground and grit and ground. um, how do I ground? I ground through movement, right? I like doing yoga. Of course, I'm a yoga teacher and I own a studio, Treehouse Yoga. So I ground with movement. So yoga is my go-to. Like that's the default. Pero when I feel the need to balance grit and ground, that's when I do circuit. I get my dumbbells. Yay, I have new dumbbells. Right? So I get my dumbbells and work out talaga. Like strength training, I do circuit, I do hit. Ganyan. Because yeah. So those are my go-tos. Another way for me that when I want to grit, right? Ba yun? Parang when I want to grit, right? When I want to grit, I actually listen to hip hop music and rock music.
Anong song yan?
The playlist
Nice.
ako, I'll share. Joke.
Thanks for answering that. So, you know what?
Yeah.
Thank you again so much, Rach, for,
You're
for this
welcome.
time. And again, about, our discussion about holding space. And like what you said, it doesn't come naturally for humans and specifically for Filipinos, right? For all the reasons that you mentioned. So hopefully in this time that we've shared with you, Car and I and Ned, we've gotten really some great tips and some triggers and some notes into identifying if you're holding space or not holding space, and hopefully our viewers they got that too. So thank you so much. So Lighthouse Wellness Philippines, and you're on Instagram, Facebook,
Yes.
and also the website www.lighthousewellnessph.com.
Yep. Yep. Thank you for
Nice.
having me.
Most welcome. Thank you. Such a great conversation we've had. Learned a lot today. So, yeah, that's it for today, folks. So, we would love to hear your thoughts on our conversation. And, so just reach out to us at gritgroundph underscore on IG and Grit and Ground on Facebook, and lots of other characters to meet in our previous episodes too. So, this is Joy, that is
Car.
Car. No, we're pointing at. And of course, Ned, our creative director, always making us sound and look good. And thank you so much for our guest, Rach Bonifacio.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, guys.
Most welcome. Thank you.